So now we're in part 4 and we're going to make a slightly more useful application. This time we're going to make a simple timer, and the simple timer is going to reuse the main CPP and the main QML from my Qt2. So we're going to make a copy of them and make a new folder. The new folder we can call this simple timer, and in simple timer we are just going to paste those two files that we copied there. So we've got a main CPP, a main C++ file, and that's fine as it is. And our main QML, well, we can actually call it something rather than just a window this time. And that's the title that appears on the top of the window bar. And we've got a label, and the label is called the message, but we're going to put the time in here this time. So we're basically doing the same as before, but this time the label will show the time and the button will be a stop button. So just changing the text to the time will go here, and we'll deal with what it shows later. Then we have our button, and the text on the button will be start stop, and it's still centered in the parent, so that's fine. The Boolean property, we don't need a Boolean property this time, so we can just get rid of that. And the onClicked method is going to be very simple, and basically if there's a property in a timer, so we're going to create a timer, and that one of the properties of the timer is running. It's a Boolean property, and so if the timer dot running, it's going to be either true or false, but if it's false, then when we press the button, it will check if the timer's running, and if it isn't, then we'll get it running, and if the timer is already running, then we're going to set the timer dot running to false. So that's all the button actually does, is you press it, it checks whether or not it's running, and then it changes it to the opposite. So if it's not running, it starts the timer running, and if it's already running, then it stops the timer. And that's all that button will do. So we save this, and then we don't really need that main C++ file anymore, so we can close that over. Let's open up a terminal in our project folder. So right clicking in the window will allow us to open up a terminal in the correct location, and then we do qmake project, which gives us our simple timer.pro, to which we add qt plus equals QML. And that's all we'll need from our simple timer.pro, so we can close that over. And now we're going to run qmake, and that will create our make file, and then make, which will give us our binary. Now we're not going to run that just yet because we're referencing the timer, so we want to create a QML type called timer, and that will have its own containing curly brackets as well, and the ID of the timer, which we've referenced in the onClick there, is going to be the timer. So what do we have in a timer? Well, let's look up QML timer, and that will take us to the Qt documentation again. And you'll see the properties that a QML timer has. So there's properties, there's signals and methods, and we're going to just use the interval, repeat, and running. You can see from the example there. So the interval's in milliseconds, so we would want 1000 milliseconds for our interval, which is 1 second, of course. So start with interval of 1000, And so every second the timer will send a signal, and it will say it's happened. Running will begin it as running is false, so that you have to press the button to get the timer to start. Now after the timer sends its signal, repeat. We want it to keep going, so repeat is true. And then once the timer has 1000 milliseconds has passed, or the 1 second has passed, then the timer will trigger. And so what happens when the timer is triggered? Well, we want to increase the seconds just by 1. Now seconds we haven't created yet, so let's create a property. It's going to be called seconds, and it will start as 0. Now previously we used a Boolean property. This time we're going to create a property, and it's going to be an integer. So property int seconds is 0. And we want minutes as well, so let's have another property, another integer property, and we'll call that minutes. And that starts at 0 as well. Now because we're going to be manipulating the display, we want to keep the integer separate, and we're going to create a property string called the second string, and that's going to reference seconds, but it's going to change that to a string so that we can perform string operations on it easily without messing with the actual counting timer, which is an integer. And we will have another property which is another string, and this is the minutes string. So we have a reference to minutes, and we'll change that to a string as well. So every time a second passes when the timer is running, we'll add 1 to the seconds. So let's save that. And if we run it with /simple timer, we'll see that we haven't put in the time on the label yet. So let's do that. So let's go down to the label, and all we're adjusting here is the text. So the text is going to be the minute string separated by a colon and then the second string. So the text is minute string plus, and this string happens to be a space and a colon and another space, and then we'll have another part of the string, which is the whatever value second string is holding at the moment. So let's run that now. And if we press the start stop button, you'll see it's displaying the seconds. And so every 1000 milliseconds, so every second, the seconds are increasing by 1, and it's displaying that with the second string. So the main functionality is all there. We just need to try and make it a little bit prettier. It's looking a bit shabby at the moment. So what if we have the text on the button? We could have it to say start when the timer is not running, and we can have it to say stop when the timer is running. So in QML, you can a property of a QML type can be a JavaScript expression, and we're going to use an if-else clause here. And this is not the neat way to do it, so I'm just going to show how this works and how the QML is quite fine with it. We're going to have an if-else clause, and if the timer.running is true, then we're going to show the relevant text there. So we'll return this particular string for the text. So if it's running, then we want the button to say stop. If it isn't running, so otherwise, we'll return the string start. So that's what the text will be on the button. It will evaluate that JavaScript expression, and it will show the relevant string as the text for the button. So even if we neaten this up as best we can with using the tabs, it's not it's still not really great. It looks pretty messy, but you'll see here if we run it, then it works fine. So it says stop when the timer is running, and then when the timer isn't running it says start. So that's the functionality we want, but let's have it just so that it's a little bit more readable and a little bit less of a mess. So in JavaScript you can use an expression. You start with the if clause there in brackets, and then you have a question mark after it, and you evaluate what happens if that statement is true. So the timer.running, it's a Boolean expression. So if the timer.running is true, then we want the value to be stop, and otherwise we want the value to say start. So if the timer.running is false, then we're going to say start. And that is a hell of a lot neater, and it provides the same functionality as that whole if-else clause there, because it is the if-else clause. It's just written in a neater way. So that's quite often used in QML, because you want the property of your type. So for example, the text of the label there, we wanted that to be different depending on the condition that we've set. So again, we're going to have another condition here for the second string. So at the moment it's just showing any number below 10, it's showing just on its own. So we want it to check what value the seconds is. So for values above 10, it's absolutely fine. We can just show the seconds dot to string. So it's taken seconds, turn it into string. So it's really just showing seconds but in string form. So above 10, so we put your statement and then a question mark, and then that's your, if this is true, that's fine. And then you have a colon. After that is your else clause. So else, you want to return a 0, and the seconds dot to string, so the string value of seconds. So what actually, yeah, we need greater than 9. So if seconds is greater than 9, it's fine. Otherwise, add a 0 to it. And that's a if-else clause, but just a bit neater. So again, same for the minute string. So you have your evaluation statement. So if minutes is greater than 9, then show minutes to string. Otherwise, show a 0 plus minutes to string. So now the second string and the minute string, they will deal with any numbers between 0 and 9, and then we're just displaying minute string and second string in the label. So that's all dealt with by the second string and minute string using that if-else clause. So there we have a timer, and it's always showing 2 digits for minutes, and it's always showing 2 digits for the seconds.